guys, welcome back to our Science and God study. We are in week 10. We are covering the theory of evolution, part 1. So our study of evolution is going to be very similar to our study on the Big Bang Theory, where we're going to break it up into 3 weeks. The first week is going to be some preliminary information where we're going to talk about some terms and definitions and distinctions that we need to make so that when we get into the heavier material of week 2, we're going to know what we're going to have a proper understanding of what we're talking about so that there's not confusion and so that we can get through the information with the clarity that we need to get the point. So today we're covering a discussion of the Big Bang Theory, the study that we just finished. We're going to talk about the Big Bang Theory and the theory of evolution. We're going to talk about some terms that we need to be aware of and that we need to know moving forward. We're going to talk about some important distinctions between specifically different types of evolution and some different terms. We're going to talk about microevolution. We're going to talk about Darwinian and macroevolution. And then we are going to close with a brief recap of what we've covered today. So the Big Bang Theory we covered from week 7 to week 9. So again, that was over the course of 3 weeks. If you were not here for the whole series, I recommend that you can stop the video now and go and watch the Big Bang Theory because it's full of great information that we need to be aware of concerning the Big Bang Theory and the problems that it has and the fact that it's not this perfect model of where the universe came from that it's played out to be. It's not. It's very flawed and it's fundamentally inaccurate, unscientific, and not true. So if you want information about that, please feel free to stop this video and go ahead and watch the Big Bang Theory series. So the Big Bang Theory is ultimately science fiction used to support naturalism. It's just not true. It's unscientific. It's an attempt to explain the origin of the universe by excluding God and using the conditions of the universe as we know it today to attempt to trace backwards the event throughout history. So there's this giant gap. That's not even a gap. It's basically we know the conditions of the universe today. We think that it must have come from a Big Bang because the universe is expanding today, so we're trying to trace it backwards from when it was smaller and smaller and smaller. And so just basically trying to fill this gigantic gap of time from when the universe supposedly was born to where we are today. So a large portion of the population believes the Big Bang Theory to be scientifically accurate in the means by which the universe truly came to be. Why? Because the Big Bang Theory is played out as being the true scientifically accurate way that the universe came to be, and it's simply not. So the Big Bang model has many issues, from defying scientific laws to making false predictions. There are so many issues with the Big Bang Theory. So the Big Bang Theory is unscientific and inaccurate. It's unscientific because it outright defies scientific laws, specifically the laws of thermodynamics and the law of conservation of energy. And it's inaccurate in its predictions. So the scientific community, and I put these in quotations because it's there are people who believe in the Big Bang Theory in general that are increasingly turning away from the fundamentals of the Big Bang Theory and trying to find another explanation or another variation of the origin of the universe because there are so many glaring inconsistencies, false predictions, and unscientific explanations for the Big Bang Theory. So again, we covered the Big Bang on week 8, 7, 8, and 9. So the Big Bang Theory and the theory of evolution. So these are the two predominant explanations that support the Naturalist Worldview. So what is the Naturalist Worldview? The Naturalist Worldview is this idea that the universe and life and everything that we know today came as a result of natural processes alone, without a God, without a creator, without any divine or supernatural interference. There are only natural processes at work in the world. They both answer the questions of origin, so some fundamental life questions such as where did the universe come from? Where did all this come from? And also where did life come from? So they both take the conditions of the present to attempt to trace back history to the point of its theorized beginning. So for Big Bang proponents, they believe that there is a gigantic bang of nothing. So they try to trace it back from where we are today to this Big Bang of nothing. For evolutionists, it is the idea that we were stardust. We were dust on a star floating through space. And so they try to trace back from a stardust to the advanced life forms and complex life forms that we have on the planet today. So they both theorized the beginning and tried to fill this gigantic gap of time, supposed gigantic gap of time, until they find where we are today. And they try to do so in a way that makes sense. However, they can't because it doesn't make sense and because their theorized beginnings are inaccurate. So you cannot observe the past. You can only make, especially when you're talking about hundreds of millions of years or billions of years, you cannot observe this. You can only make predictions on what happened to get us to where we are in the present. So there's no way for us to observe 100 million years ago. There's no way for us to observe 2 billion years ago. There's nobody there to record any data. All we can do is look at the condition of the universe today and make guesses on what could have happened to get us to where we are today. So they both claim that science not only supports it, but that science proves their claims, that their claims are scientifically accurate, that science backs it up, and it proves that these are correct theories. But we already found out that science absolutely does not prove the Big Bang Theory. In fact, science has a huge problem with the Big Bang Theory. So they both claim to be based on evidence and proof, not faith. That's kind of we talked about the boast of naturalism, that we'll leave faith to you religious people who believe in this nonsense of this invisible creator. However, we'll take our scientific evidence and proof to find the real answers. So that's kind of the boast of naturalism. And that's why we Christians are foolish and ignorant, and they are the realistic and factual ones. However, we've already found out that the Big Bang Theory doesn't quite pan out this way, that they require a tremendous amount of faith to believe that the Big Bang Theory is accurate and true. So some terms that we need to know. So evolution. So I asked our group, what do we think of when we think of evolution? And the consensus was, well, we think of monkeys turning into men. We think of fish walking out into land. And basically we think of organisms evolving into more complex organisms. So taxonomy. So early in our study we talked about different branches of science because we're covering different branches of science throughout the course of our study. So we're talking about taxonomy, which is the branch of science concerned with systematic classification of organisms. So one thing we need to understand is that this classification of organisms is obviously man-made, right? And it's based off of characteristics that are similar between organisms. Like we have the canine kind, which would be dogs, and all the variety of dogs. We've got so many different kinds of dogs. Including wolves and our domesticated dogs, and feline kinds where we have, mountain lions, jaguars, and also my cute little house cat, So evolution, there's a few different types of evolution that we absolutely need to be aware of. There's microevolution, which is legitimate. I know, that's probably shocking. And then there's macroevolution. So we're going to discuss both of these in more detail. We also have Darwinian evolution, which is what we typically think of today when we talk about evolution. It's named after Charles Darwin, notably going back to his book called The Origin of Species. So the change from one kind to another is Darwinian evolution. And this is extremely, extremely important. If you don't take anything else away from this study, you need to understand that Darwinian evolution claims that there's a change from one kind, not species, one kind to another. We're going to talk about exactly what that means in a little bit. So a kind is a classification of a form or a sort or a type of animals. So a kind does not mean a species. It's much more broad than that. Like we have humankind. Right, so that's a kind. We've got canine kind, which is dogs. We've got feline kind, which is cats. So these are not species, okay? Fish would fall into their own kind as well. And then you've got other kinds as well, such as different types of plants and so on and so forth. So natural selection is the process of some characteristics being favorable and better suited for survival than others. So I gave this kind of silly example of natural selection. So bear with me. This is a silly illustration, but it's natural selection at its finest. So say that we're in a classroom and the only source of food available, so we're just assuming that we're trying to just survive here. The only source of food available is at the height of the ceiling. So I am short. So in our classroom, I cannot reach the ceiling, and we're going to assume that I cannot jump, that I don't have something to stand on. I've got no way to reach it other than my height. I rely on my height to be able to reach the food source. So since I'm not able to reach the food source, I would die. Since I'm dead, I am not able to reproduce, so I'm not able to pass on my genes onto an offspring, my genes of my height onto an offspring. Quentin, however, is taller than me, so we'll say that he is able to reach the food source that's on the ceiling. So he is going to be able to survive because he will be able to take that, he'll be able to eat it, he'll survive, he'll be able to reproduce, and he will, because he's reproducing, pass on his tall genes onto an offspring. So his offspring will grow, and it will be able to survive because it will have his tall genes where the offspring will also be able to reach up and eat the food. So I will die, I will not be able to reproduce, so short people will die, and Quentin and tall people will be able to reproduce, and they'll be able to survive. So that's natural selection, okay? We're going to talk about this with Darwin's finches, because that's exactly what that is as well. So species is a classification within a specific kind, such as we have got many different, when you're talking about different types of cats, you're not talking about different kinds, because cats is a kind. However, when you're talking about different types of cats, from like a mountain lion or jaguar or cheetah to a domestic house cat, you're talking about different species. So species is just small details changing and being able to classify an organism as a different species. However, change of kinds is a much more broad, much more major change. And there are, I just want to mention this, there are many different definitions of species. So do not be deceived, do not be confused. Just know that a species and a kind are two very distinctly different things. Not knowing this difference will lead and does lead to a belief in evolution, because you will misunderstand what people try to give as evidence. So speciation is kind of like natural selection, where it is a change in the genetic makeup of a kind that changes one species into another species within the same kind. So it's not from one kind to another, it's just a change from one species to another species. So we'll take a beetle. So you take a beetle from its natural environment, you bring it into a foreign environment, its food source changes, so its appearance will change based off of its food source. Maybe its food source is more rich in a certain nutrient, and so this nutrient has a certain effect and it changes the body type of the beetle. And so the beetle is still a beetle, however it could be classified as a different species because it has been changed. So important distinctions: microevolution versus macroevolution. So it's important for us to make certain distinctions in order to understand evolution and what it claims. So not understanding the distinctions we're about to talk about is a major cause for believing in the theory of evolution. We need to understand the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. People often point at examples of microevolution and mistakenly say that it is macroevolution. But as we're going to see in a minute, they are vastly, extremely, fundamentally different. So microevolution is a change within a species. So whenever we see the word micro, we're thinking of something on a small scale. So you can think of it as a small scale change within a kind. That's not supposed to say species. I should say microevolution is a change within a kind. Macroevolution is a change from one... Man, I messed both these up. I apologize. So microevolution is a change within a kind. Macro, so when we see the word macro, we're thinking of something on a much larger scale. Macroevolution is a change from one kind to another. So this should be the word kind, and that should be the word kind. So this is within a kind, this is from one kind to another. So the feline kind to a dog kind, for example, would be macroevolution. So not knowing this extremely important difference will lead you to accept wrong evidence for the theory of evolution. And this happens all the time. What you don't know, in this case, absolutely can hurt you. And it hurts people all the time. So microevolution, it is a minor change occurring over short periods of time within a kind. Okay, so it's not within a species because it can change one species into another species, but it is a change within the same kind. So it can be a cat adapting into a distinctly different cat. So it's a minor change, not a major change, occurring over short periods of time. So microevolution, or adaptation as we'll later refer to it, can occur over the course of an organism's lifetime. So it's not over the course of many, 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 many generations. It can be over the course of one organism's lifetime. And it's a change within a kind, not from one kind to another. So there are many observable examples of microevolution today. We prefer the term adaptation or speciation because it eliminates the word evolution and thus eliminates some confusion that people might have. I just want to make this distinction. So there are many observable examples today. I'm going to give you just some broad examples of when this might occur or when this might happen. You can look up online if you want to see examples. Just be careful of what you look at because they might try to pass off microevolution for Darwinian evolution, and that's something that people do as a common practice. So we see changes in environmental conditions that lead to biological changes in an organism. So we know that organisms that live in the desert are different from organisms that live in the Arctic. They have different characteristics, such as organisms that live in the Arctic are likely to have lots of fat on their body and lots of fur on their body in order for them to be able to sustain enough body heat to survive, where you can look at organisms in the desert who have very thin or short hair with little bits of fat. When plants become immune to pesticides, or herbicides, I should say, actually. Pesticides would be to kill insects that eat them. So we see plants that become immune, like weeds, that can be killed by herbicides. So they'll be killed using this chemical, and then over the course of time, these weeds or these plants can actually become immune, so there'll be a genetic change. They can become immune to the herbicides that were once able to kill them. So the plants are still plants. This is just an adaptation or speciation. We see all the time that viruses become immune to antibiotics. So we have to get new antibiotics all the time for the same viruses because viruses can mutate. However, even though they're mutating and becoming different, the viruses are still viruses, and that's what makes it not a change of kinds. That's what makes it not Darwinian evolution. This is adaptation, this is speciation, this is microevolution. Also, when an organism's diet changes due to environmental changes and it undergoes a change as a result. So I'll say you take an animal that has, or an organism that has a diet that includes a lot of fat. So you take, I'll say a bear. You take a bear that has just a lot of fat on its body because of the food that's available where it is found naturally. So it has a lot of fat. And if you take that bear and put it in a different environment where it has to rely on a new food source that doesn't contain as much fat, you will go back over a course of time and see that this bear will be much, much more skinny and might have some other variations as a result of the change of its diet. We see this in salmon. I think it's salmon. I think it's either salmon or shrimp with some sea life where it was taken from its original habitat where it was one certain color, and then it was put in a different environment where it had to eat a different food source, and this other food source had different chemicals in it. And the chemicals within this new food source caused the pigment of the sea creature to actually change. But again, the sea creature is still a sea creature, the bear is still a bear, the plants are still plants, the viruses are still viruses. So when an organism's environment changes and they change as a result. We'll look at some examples of this later on. So we could do experiments today, and experiments are done today to see microevolution in action. Microevolution, it is observable and it is scientific. We're going to say adaptation from now on, or speciation, or natural selection, just because we don't like the word evolution, because it draws to mind Darwinian evolution, and we're going to try to make distinctions, so we're going to try to avoid that. However, microevolution is completely fine. And it does not contradict Christianity or creationism at all. However, when people refer to evolution, they're typically thinking of macro or Darwinian evolution, so we'll talk about those. So macroevolution, we're going to see how this is just so different from microevolution. So macro, thinking of something on a larger scale, is a major change occurring over long periods of time, and they are changes from one kind into another. Again, not one species into another species, because that's microevolution. We're looking at major changes like going from having gills to having lungs, from having fins to swim to having feet to walk, and occurring over long periods of time, not within a generation, not within one organism's lifespan, but over the course of hundreds of thousands to millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions to billions of years time frame. And it's a change from one kind to another. So a fish into a monkey, or a monkey into a man, or stardust into other single cell organisms. So this is vastly, much distinctly different from microevolution. So Darwinian evolution is the belief that all life originated from one organism that, through natural selection, developed variations that eventually evolved into entirely different organisms. So natural selection, again, it's legitimate. It's legitimate because we see that some characteristics make it easier to survive. If there's one piece of food and there's a 300-pound jacked guy and myself in a room, and one of us is going to die if we don't get that food and we have to kill each other, that dude's going to win. Okay, so that would be survival of the fittest. That would be natural selection. But so Darwinian evolution claims that these variations, this speciation, can become a change of kinds. So it's the belief that life originated from stardust into the life that we have today over the course of hundreds of millions or billions of years. So here we go. So an example is stardust into yeast, into fish, into apes, into man. So in closing, the terms that we use when we're talking about evolution are extremely important. We need to know what we're saying, and we need to know the differences. It's important for us to know the terms and what they mean. The lack of this knowledge causes people to believe in Darwinian evolution. I'm going to say that again. The lack of knowing these differences causes, I'm not saying it can cause, I'm saying it does cause people to believe in Darwinian evolution. Microevolution is legitimate. We will call it other names from now on just to avoid that word. It is observable and doesn't contradict creationism or Christianity. We don't need to worry about microevolution. However, we need to worry about macroevolution and Darwinian evolution because they're not legitimate. They're not observable, and it's a belief that intentionally excludes God from the picture and says that we're essentially nothing, there's no point to life. So these are what we need to be concerned with and what we need to be able to defend against. So we're not going to argue about microevolution because it's absolutely legitimate. However, Darwinian evolution and macroevolution, they're not. This is the speculation and theorization with no proof. So next week we'll be taking a closer look at Darwinian evolution, and we'll be discussing some questions and a lot of problems in Darwinian evolution. We'll look at some evidence that's given for it, and it's just going to be a great study. So please make sure that you watch week 11 of this series. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you remember the terms and the definitions just so that there's not confusion. God bless you guys. I look forward to seeing you soon. I hope you have a great week. Thanks for watching.